Shabbat Shalom and Gemar Chatima Tova, which loosely translated means Shabbat Shalom and may you be inscribed and sealed in the book of life for a good year. I think you've heard that before. Once again, I'd like to express my thanks for the honor of being asked to deliver a sermon from this pulpit. I believe that along with that honor comes a certain responsibility, and I want to state up front what I believe that responsibility is, especially on this Shabbat that falls between two of the holiest days in the Jewish calendar year. I believe that it's my responsibility to give you a takeaway from what I say tonight, something that you will remember after you leave the building, something that you will want to use from now on to make a difference in your life and in everyone else's. So a little truth-telling first. In order to compose this sermon, I formulated 5 questions for both you and me, the answers to which would constitute the basis of what I wanted to say. So here are the questions in no particular order. What do we think we're doing here tonight, as opposed to what we're supposed to be doing here tonight? 2, what did you consciously decide you were going to accomplish Jewishly during these days of awe, and how did you plan to go about accomplishing it? No squirming in the seats, please. Since we believe that the high holy days are all about atonement and forgiveness, what's the process really supposed to be? And are we getting it right? 4, this is going to sound like a lot of stuff squished together. That's because it is. What do Judaism's concept of the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara have in common with Star Wars, Harry Potter, and the writings of Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Gustav Jung? And how could any of that be relevant to the High Holy Days? I'm so glad you asked. And finally, what's the Hebrew word for the bill that you get in an Israeli restaurant after you've finished eating? And how does that relate to the process that we're supposed to be going through during these 10 days? So let's get started answering these questions, otherwise it's going to be a very long night. But before I even do that, I want to share with you a working definition of God. I'm sure you didn't think that's what you were going to hear on Shabbat Shuvah. Working definition of God, because I think it will be relevant to what follows. Whether you are a believer, an agnostic, or an atheist, this definition, courtesy of Dr. Erich Fromm, a German Jewish social psychologist and psychoanalyst, gives us a basis on which to deal with the concepts and ideas of the high holy days without compromising our principles. Fromm said, and I think this is a phenomenally cool definition, Fromm said that God is the motivating force in our life and the goal toward which we strive. Poof, that's it, the whole thing. The motivating force in our life and the goal toward which we strive. So whatever your own definition of God might be, if you plug this definition into the prayers that you recite, you might well find that your path becomes clearer and your choices become easier and better defined. So now to the questions. Although I haven't taken a poll about this, I would guess that most Jews believe that our job and goal during the holy days, in other words, what we're doing here, is to do the required repenting, forgiving, and being forgiven so that God will approve of what we've done and not only forgive us, but also grant us another year of life. That's what it says in the prayer book. And I think this idea is based on some beliefs, concepts, and teachings that I think are questionable at best and at the very least out of their natural order. I think we put too much emphasis on our relationship with God during this period and not enough on our relationships with each other. As far back as the days of the Talmud, and I would tell you that that's between 1,500 and 1,800 years ago, we are taught that we are not expected or even permitted to ask forgiveness from God unless or until we have admitted our wrongs, our sins, first to the people we have wronged, asked them for forgiveness, and given them a chance to forgive us, and we them. And only after we have gone through that process with, are you ready for this? Everyone we have wronged, are we at liberty to ask God to forgive us. And my hunch is that if our all-knowing God knows that you've gone through that process honestly, then by the time you get around to asking God for forgiveness, you will have easily earned God's forgiveness to the point that you shouldn't even have to worry about it. The point is, if you do your work with the people in your life, your relationship with God will flow naturally from that. In other words, don't skip over or avoid dealing with your fellow human beings. If we could ever get that part right, we'd be able to avoid not only horrors like wars, but most of the other, you should pardon my French, schmonzes that messes up our daily lives as well. Judaism is telling us to get our priorities straight. Put people, community, and society first. If we do that, the rest will follow. Second question. Did you really think about how you were going to approach these high holy days? Did you sit down and think it through? Most people don't. We just kind of do what we're told. We go through the motions. Have you really thought about how you were going to do anything besides showing up and sitting through hours of services and sermons? Have you consciously thought about whom you might have wronged over the course of the last year, about how you might approach them to admit the error of your ways and then actually ask them to forgive you? So I don't want to get personal, but how's that list going for you? How's your effort coming along? How seriously are you taking this annual assignment? Are you any closer to being ready or able to approach God and ask for divine forgiveness than you were before Rosh Hashanah? How much closer do you think you'll be by next Wednesday, which is deadline day, otherwise known as Yom Kippur? So maybe this would be a good time to remind ourselves that Judaism is not now, has never been, and will never be a spectator sport. In order to be Jewish, you really need to do Jewish. And being Jewish during the High Holy Days takes more than just reading prayers, listening to uplifting music, and hearing inspiring sermons. You know how furious you get when there's been another mass shooting, and the politician's response is thoughts and prayers? Well, same thing here. If all we do is thoughts and prayers, we're wasting our time and God's time as well. If nothing else, it means that we have to remember the moral values of our tradition and reapply them to our daily lives in such a way that we are conscious of them, that we live them out in our actions in an unmistakable way. For starters, in this very challenging time, I suggest going with compassion first, even before passion, even though that's probably counterintuitive. So, like I said, doing Jewish is not a spectator sport. So next, about the seemingly off-the-wall question about the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, Star Wars, Harry Potter, and Carl Jung. The binary Jewish concepts of Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara are about our inclinations. That's the scientific term, our inclinations. The Yetzer Tov is the drive to do good, to follow what we believe to be God's will, and to act ethically. The Yetzer Hara is the drive toward selfishness, materialism, and base instincts. Much more exciting. But we Jews believe that both of them are natural parts of the human soul. The Yetzer Hara is not evil in itself, in an absolute sense. It includes things like ambition, desire, and competitiveness, all things that are necessary for survival and progress, but dangerous when they're unbalanced. The goal is not to destroy the Yetzer Hara, but to channel it toward good purposes, like building a family, creating art, or starting a business. The High Holy Days are intended to help us focus on our drives and inclinations, and hopefully to help us understand that we are not supposed to do what we're supposed to do in order to please God, but because it's the right thing to do. So along the same lines, Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychotherapist, contemporary of Sigmund Freud, who introduced to us the concept of the shadow, an unconscious but inevitable and essential part of our psyche, the part which we usually really don't like, about which we are embarrassed, ashamed of, and wouldn't want our parents, friends, or coworkers to know about, and which we realize, even if unconsciously, that we need to acknowledge, confront, and integrate that shadow into our lives. I'd say that it's a close, if not identical, sibling or cousin of the Yetzer Hara. More recently, Star Wars introduced us to the Force. And that Force, you might remember, had two identifiable sides, the dark side and the light side. This is not rocket science, no pun intended. Anakin Skywalker turns to the dark side by giving in to fear and anger, and thus becomes Darth Vader. However, Luke Skywalker wins in the end by acknowledging his own dark side, which is translated as rage at Vader, or in Jung's terms, he comes to terms with his shadow and chooses not to act on it, but rather to integrate it into his psyche. It's more than just the tension between good and evil. It's how we respond to them, the choices that we make, day after challenging day. And finally, Harry Potter is much the same. Tom Riddle becomes Lord Voldemort, who obviously must not be named, who basically represents evil in raw form. And Harry Potter is the poster child for compassion, forgiveness, hope, and love, even though we learn that there's a bit of Voldemort even in Harry. So once again, we see that archetypal good versus evil paradigm where the triumph of good over evil happens because people make conscious and sometimes terribly difficult choices, not only to be good, but to do good, even in the face of seemingly overwhelming evil. So the last of these 5 questions that I raised earlier was about the Hebrew word for, among other things, a restaurant tab. The word is cheshbon. It basically means an accounting. The connection of that term with the High Holy Days is that we call this holy day season the time for cheshbon hanefesh, an accounting of the soul. We designate and set this time aside so that we can take stock to see what we need to do to settle our accounts, first with each other and then with God. It's a place in time where we try to be or become accountable to one another. We are tasked with looking at the choices that we have made and vowing to try not to make the same mistakes again. I am, as usual, reminded of the quotation from Mark Twain, who urged us to learn from the mistakes of others because you can't possibly live long enough to make them all yourself. Although my mother would have said that I certainly tried. with the question in mind of what we should really be doing here, I'd like to leave you this evening with three things to take away. The first is a piece written over 400 years ago, 401 years ago, by John Donne. I think it speaks for itself. No man is an island entire of itself. Each is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thine own or of thy friends were. Each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore, send not to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. That's first takeaway. I'm sure that John said it better than I could, but it's a start. The second takeaway is a ritual that I commend to your own practice. I do this ritual every day, even more religiously than prayer. You can tell that to my rabbinical colleagues. When I get up in the morning, part of my getting up process includes, without fail, asking myself what I intend or expect to do that day to make the world a better place than it was when I went to bed the night before. I don't have to have an answer or a plan at that moment. I only have to ask myself the question, consciously, with the intention of answering it during the course of the day. And then, as I prepare for bed each night, without fail, I ask myself what I actually did that day to make the world a better place than it was when I got up that morning. And here's the problem. I'm a morning person. So when I'm ready for bed, I want to go to bed early. But if I can't answer that question with a specific affirmative answer, and it doesn't have to be earth-shattering or messianic, then I don't permit myself to go to bed until I can affirmatively say that I have done whatever that thing is that would somehow have made the world better. And believe it or not, that's very motivating for me. I recommend it to you as a personal practice. The third and final takeaway, especially with the High Holy Day concept in mind that our actions are what can earn us the right and privilege of continuing to live for another day or year, I offer this poem by a mostly unknown American poet by the name of Edgar Guest. It's titled, Have You Earned Your Tomorrow? Is anybody happier because you passed his way? Does anyone remember that you spoke to him today? The day is almost over, and its toiling time is through. Is there anyone to utter now a kindly word of you? Did you give a cheerful greeting to a friend who came along? Or a churlish sort of howdy and then vanish in the throng? Were you selfish, pure, and simple as you rushed along the way? Or is someone mighty grateful for a deed you did today? Can you say tonight, in parting with a day that's slipping fast, that you helped a single brother of the many that you passed? Is a single heart rejoicing over what you did or said? Does someone whose hopes were fading now with courage look ahead? Did you waste the day or lose it? Was it well or poorly spent? Did you leave a trail of kindness or a scar of discontent? As you close your eyes in slumber, do you think that God would say, you have earned one more tomorrow by the work you did today? Shabbat Shalom and Gamar Chatima Tova.